The crystal flute in her hand didn't shatter when she saw him, but the stillness that seized her body was far more violent than any noise. Across the crowded ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, under the heavy glow of chandeliers that cost more than most people's lifetimes, Elena watched the man she had destroyed 5 years ago walk in. Not broken, not alone, but holding the hand of a woman who looked like the future while Elena suddenly felt like a fading past. It is the terrifying moment when you realize that the person you thought would never get over you has not only survived, but ascended. If the quiet devastation of seeing a past life return to haunt the present intrigues you, and if you want to unravel the secrets hidden behind these velvet ropes, stay with me as the curtain rises. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grit slicker, reflecting the neon bleed of the city lights on the asphalt. Inside the back seat of the Maybach, the world was hermetically sealed, silent, and smelling faintly of aged leather and Sophia's perfume, something with sandalwood and a hint of cold jasmine. Julian Thorne adjusted his cufflinks. They were onyx, heavy, and cool against his wrists. He caught his reflection in the darkened window. The face looking back was harder than the one that had left this city 5 years ago. The jawline was sharper, the gray at his temples prematurely earned but distinguished. And the eyes were no longer pleading. They were assessing. "You're doing it again," Sophia said softly. She didn't look up from her tablet, the blue light illuminating her high cheekbones and the severe, elegant cut of her dark hair. "Doing what?" Julian asked, though he knew. "Checking the armor," she said. She finally turned to him, her expression softening. She reached out, her hand warm over his clenched fist resting on his knee. "You don't need to worry, Julian. You aren't the man who ran away, and they aren't the gods you thought they were." Julian turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. Her grip was firm. Sophia Loren was a force of nature, a venture capitalist who ate tech startups for breakfast and negotiated mergers while doing Pilates. She was 32, 6 years younger than him, and possessed a terrifying amount of self-assurance. She was the best thing that had happened to him in the exile of London. "I'm not worried," Julian lied. "I just haven't been in this room in a long time." "The Pierre Hotel isn't a room, darling. It's a battlefield in a tuxedo," Sophia smirked, "and we have the superior ammunition." The car glided to a halt. The doorman, huddled under a large umbrella, sprang into action. As the door opened, the humidity of the Manhattan night rushed in, followed by the blinding pop of flashbulbs. Julian stepped out first. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, bespoke Savile Row, cut to emphasize the broadness of his shoulders. He turned and offered his hand to Sophia. As she emerged, the cameras went into a frenzy. She wore a slip dress of liquid silver that clung to her frame like a second skin, simple yet devastatingly expensive. She looked like a weapon forged in moonlight. They moved through the gauntlet of photographers, the shouts of Mr. Thorne over here," fading as they entered the grand foyer. The charity gala for the Metropolitan Arts Council was the event of the season. It was a room full of people who measured worth in assets and lineage. It was exactly the kind of room Elena would kill to be in. Julian felt a phantom ache in his chest, an echo of an old wound. 5 years ago, he had been an associate architect, overworked and underpaid, dragging a reluctant Elena to events where she complained about her dress being out of season. Now he was the lead architect for the new Hudson Spire project. He belonged here. "Champagne," Sophia said, handing him a flute as they bypassed the receiving line. "Drink. It helps with the hypocrisy." They circulated. Julian shook hands, exchanged pleasantries. He spoke of structural integrity and urban planning with council members who nodded gravely. But his radar was active, scanning the periphery. And then he saw them. They were standing near the ice sculpture, a cliché that suited them. Marcus Sterling looked older than his 45 years. His face was flushed, likely the gin, and his tuxedo strained slightly at the midsection. He was talking loudly, gesturing with a cigar that wasn't lit, and beside him stood Elena. Time seemed to stutter. Elena looked beautiful, objectively. She wore emerald green, a color Julian used to tell her brought out her eyes. But looking at her now, from a distance of 30 feet in 5 years, he saw the cracks. Her smile was tight, fixed in a grimace of social pleasantry. Her eyes were darting around the room, anxious, checking who was watching, who was more important. She looked tired, not sleepy tired, but soul tired. Is that her? Sophia asked. Her voice was low, devoid of judgment, merely curious. Yes, Julian said. She's smaller than I expected, Sophia noted dryly. Shall we? Sophia, we don't have to. Julian, she cut him off, her eyes dancing with a dangerous amusement. We aren't hiding in the corner. We are taking the center. Come. She pulled him forward. The crowd seemed to part for them, drawn by the gravity of their presence. As they approached the circle where Marcus was holding court, the conversation died down. Marcus turned, annoyed at the interruption, until recognition dawned. His eyes widened. The arrogance faltered. Thorn? Elena froze. She turned slowly, her champagne glass trembling ever so slightly in her manicured hand. When her gaze landed on Julian, the color drained from her face. It was as if she were seeing a ghost, but a ghost that looked better, stronger, and richer than the man she had buried. Then her eyes shifted to Sophia. She took in the liquid, silver dress, the diamonds that were tasteful but enormous, and the possessive way Sophia's hand rested on Julian's arm. Hello, Elena, Julian said. His voice was steady, calm. The sound of it seemed to shatter the invisible glass wall between them. Marcus, it's been a while. Julian, Elena whispered, her voice cracking. You're back. I am, Julian replied, and for the first time in 5 years he realized he wasn't just saying the words. He felt them. And I'd like you to meet my wife, Sophia. The word wife hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Elena's gaze dropped to Sophia's ring finger, a flawless emerald-cut diamond that caught the chandelier's light and threw it back with blinding indifference. Charmed, Sophia said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Julian has told me so little about you. The silence that followed was deafening. The silence following Sophia's remark was brief, sliced open by Marcus's booming, manufactured laughter. It was a sound meant to assert dominance, to fill the void where genuine connection should have been. Well, Marcus said, rocking back on his heels, the ice in his glass clinking dangerously. London must have treated you well, Thorn, though I heard the weather is miserable. Fits the mood of an exile, doesn't it? Julian didn't flinch. He simply took a sip of his champagne, the bubbles sharp against his tongue. The rain is good for focus, Marcus. It clears the debris. He looked at Elena. She hadn't spoken since the introduction. She was staring at his tuxedo lapel, unable to meet his eyes. The tremor in her hand had traveled up to her neck, visible in the slight pulse of a vein against her pale skin. Seeing that pulse, so familiar, so terrified, acted as a tripwire. Suddenly, the golden light of the Pierre Hotel ballroom dissolved. The smell of expensive perfume and hors d'oeuvres vanished, replaced by the scent of cardboard boxes and cold November rain. 5 years ago, Brooklyn. It was a Tuesday. Julian had come home early to surprise Elena with news of a small commission, a renovation in Queens. It wasn't the skyscraper he dreamed of, but it was a start. He had bought a bottle of wine, a cheap Merlot she liked. He unlocked the door to their brownstone apartment, expecting the warmth of the heater and perhaps the smell of dinner. Instead, he walked into a draft. The hallway was lined with suitcases, not the battered Samsonite they used for weekend trips to her parents', but brand new, stiff leather luggage. Elena was in the bedroom folding a silk blouse. She didn't jump when he entered. She just stopped moving, her back to him. You're early, she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of any cadence of affection. Elena, what is this? Julian put the wine on the dresser. The thud sounded absurdly loud in the quiet room. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. That was the thing that haunted him later. She hadn't cried. She looked at him with a pity that felt like a scalpel. I can't do this anymore, Julian. She said, I can't wait for you to be someone. I'm tired of counting pennies. I'm tired of the potential. Potential doesn't pay for the Hamptons. It doesn't pay for the life I was promised. We're building something, Julian had argued, his voice rising, panic clawing at his throat. It takes time. I don't have time, she snapped. Marcus does. The name hung there, Marcus Sterling. The client Julian had introduced her to at a gallery opening 3 months prior. The man who tipped too much and laughed too loud. "He's waiting downstairs," Elena said, zipping the final bag. The sound was a harsh rasp, like a zipper closing on a body bag. "Please, Julian, don't make a scene. Just let me go. You're a good man, but you're not a winner. You never will be." She walked past him, the wheels of the suitcase rumbling over the hardwood floor. He didn't stop her. He was paralyzed by the sheer, brutal efficiency of her betrayal. She didn't look back. She just walked out the door, and moments later he heard the heavy slam of a car door and the engine of a luxury sedan fading into the rain. The present, the Pierre Hotel. "Julian?" Sophia's voice was a lifeline, pulling him back from the cold apartment. He blinked. The ballroom reassembled itself around him. He was not the broke architect in Brooklyn anymore. He was Julian Thorne, principal of Thorne and Associates, standing in a $5,000 tuxedo. He looked at Elena again. The pity he had seen in her eyes 5 years ago was gone, replaced by something else. Hunger. She was looking at him the way she used to look at shop windows on Fifth Avenue. "It was lovely to see you both," Julian said, his voice smooth, betraying nothing of the phantom memory. "But we must circulate. There are donors to charm." He turned to Marcus, offering a thin, meaningless smile of balm. "Good luck with the fund, Marcus. I heard the market has been volatile." Marcus's jaw tightened, the barb landing perfectly. Everyone in the room knew Sterling Capital was bleeding money. Julian placed his hand on the small of Sophia's back, guiding her away. They walked 10 paces before he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "You went somewhere else just then," Sophia murmured, not looking at him, keeping her smile fixed for the photographers. "Just checking the rearview mirror," Julian replied quietly. And I realized," Julian said, glancing back one last time at the couple standing awkwardly by the ice sculpture, "that the view behind us is getting smaller every second. The seating chart at a New York gala is never random. It is a meticulously curated geography of power, favors, and calculated cruelty." When the usher guided Julian and Sophia to table 1, the table closest to the stage, directly under the center chandelier, Julian saw the setup immediately. They were seated directly across from Marcus and Elena. "Fate has a sense of humor," Sophia whispered as she took her seat, smoothing the silk of her dress. She didn't look displeased. She looked like a chess player who had just been handed a distinct advantage on the board. Elena was already seated, her posture rigid. She was gripping the stem of her wineglass with unnecessary force. Beside her, Marcus was signaling a waiter for another scotch, his face already gleaming with a sheen of perspiration. The centerpiece, a towering arrangement of white orchids, acted as a partial barricade, but it couldn't filter the tension. "So," Marcus boomed, abandoning the scotch search to lean over the table. "Thorne, I hear you're bidding on the Hudson Spire. Ambitious project for a boutique firm." "We prefer specialized, Marcus," Julian corrected gently, unfolding his napkin. "And yes, the bid is in. We're confident." "Confident," Elena echoed. She looked at Julian, her eyes searching his face for the boy she used to know. "You were always cautious, Julian. I remember you agonizing over the smallest details of a bathroom renovation for weeks. Do you really think you can handle a 70-story tower?" It was a clumsy strike. She was trying to remind the table of his humble beginnings, trying to shrink him back down to the size he was when she left him. Before Julian could answer, Sophia laughed. It was a soft, melodious sound that drew the attention of the entire table. "Oh, Elena," Sophia said, her voice warm but laced with steel. "That's the difference between a contractor and an architect. A contractor worries about the tiles. An architect worries about the legacy. Julian doesn't build for today. He builds for the skyline of the next century." Elena blinked, stunned by the casual dismissal. She adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat, a piece Julian recognized as a loaner. He knew the clasp was tricky. She was fidgeting with it. "I suppose," Elena stammered, trying to regain her footing. "I just know his process. We were together for a long time. I know what stresses him out." She turned her gaze to Julian, softening it into a weaponized intimacy. "Like that time in Montauk, remember? You couldn't sleep for 3 nights because of that client with the beach house. She was staking her claim, planting a flag in his history. I know him, she was saying. I was there. Julian felt a flash of irritation. He reached for his water, but Sophia's hand moved first. She rested her fingers lightly on his forearm, a gesture of ownership that was absolute. It's fascinating how people change when they are supported rather than drained, Sophia said to Elena. The insult was so wrapped in philosophical observation that it took a second to land. Julian sleeps quite soundly now. In fact, we just spent a month in Kyoto studying sustainable timber. He finds peace in the structure of things. She turned to Elena with a polite, inquisitive smile. And you, Elena? You're still at the gallery in Chelsea? The one that focuses on emerging local artists? Yes, Elena said defensively. We discovered 3 new painters last year. How quaint, Sophia said. I sit on the board of the Tate Modern. We should discuss acquisition strategies sometime. Although the markets are quite different. We deal mostly in blue-chip investments. The silence that followed was brutal. Sophia hadn't just outclassed Elena. She had rendered her professional existence adorable but irrelevant. Marcus, oblivious to the subtle evisceration of his wife, let out a grunt. Art is a waste of money unless you can flip it in 6 months. That's what I tell her. Speaking of money, Julian, I assume you married into it? That firm in London didn't spring up from nothing. The table went quiet. It was a crude, direct attack, the kind only a desperate man makes. Julian looked at Marcus. He saw the frayed threads on Marcus's cuff, the bloodshot eyes, the fear masquerading as aggression. 5 years ago, this man had seemed like a titan. Now he just looked like a bad investment. I built the firm, Marcus, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, commanding the table's attention. Sophia manages her own portfolio. We are partners. It's a concept you might want to explore. It requires mutual respect. He looked at Elena then, something we never quite mastered. Elena flinched as if he had slapped her. She looked down at her plate, her face burning. The waiter arrived with the first course, tuna tartare with avocado mousse, but the appetite at table 1 had vanished. Under the table, Sophia's hand found Julian's leg. She squeezed it once, a silent signal of victory. Julian didn't feel triumphant, though. Watching Elena crumble over an appetizer didn't feel like winning. It felt like watching a building implode in slow motion, tragic, messy, and inevitable. Bon appétit, Sophia said cheerfully, picking up her fork. The silence inside the town car was heavy, thickened by the fumes of Marcus's 4th scotch and the residual humidity of the rain-slicked city passing outside the tinted windows. Elena stared out at the blur of Park Avenue, pressing her forehead against the cool glass to soothe the throbbing ache behind her temples. He laughed at me, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the slur of a man whose ego had been bruised more deeply than he could admit. Elena didn't turn her head. He didn't laugh, Marcus. He was polite. Polite? Marcus scoffed, a harsh, wet sound. He loosened his bow tie, yanking it free as if it were a noose. That wasn't politeness. That was condescension. The way he looked at my suit. The way that bitch he married looked at your jewelry. He turned on her, his eyes glassy and venomous. I thought you said he was a loser, a dreamer with no business sense. That's what you told me when you crawled into my bed 5 years ago. He was, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. He was struggling. Well, he isn't struggling now, Marcus snapped. He's bidding on the Hudson Spire. Do you know what happens if he gets that contract? The banks will line up to kiss his ring. And here I am begging for extensions on the Hamptons house. Elena closed her eyes. The mention of the debts made her stomach turn. The perfect life she had left Julian for was a house of cards held together by leverage and lies. Marcus wasn't the titan of industry she had imagined. He was a gambler on a losing streak, and he needed someone to blame. The car pulled up to their building on 72nd Street. The doorman opened the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They rode the elevator in silence, the numbers ticking up like a countdown to an execution. Inside the penthouse, the air was stale. It was a beautiful apartment, featured in Architectural Digest 2 years ago, but it felt like a museum exhibit, cold and untouchable. I'm going to the study, Marcus grunted, heading straight for the liquor cabinet. "Don't wait up." It was a dismissal, and for the first time that night, Elena felt a wave of relief. She listened to his heavy footsteps retreat, followed by the slam of the heavy oak door. She was alone. She went into the master bedroom, kicking off her heels. Her feet ached. She walked into the walk-in closet, a cavernous space filled with designer labels that she suddenly felt no desire to wear. She sat down on the velvet ottoman in the center of the room, still in her emerald gown, and pulled her phone from her clutch. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She knew she shouldn't do it. It was a form of self-harm, digital masochism. But the image of Julian at the gala, so tall, so steady, looking at Sophia as if she were the only source of gravity in the room, burned in her mind. She opened the browser, her thumbs moved quickly, typing a sequence she had typed 100 times before, but never with this much desperation. Julian Thorne, architect. The results flooded the screen. New articles from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Dizine. Thorne and Associates unveils vision for sustainable urban living. The return of Julian Thorne, from London exile to New York kingmaker. She clicked on the images. There was Julian, standing on a construction site in a hard hat, pointing at a blueprint. He looked older, yes, but stronger. The softness around his jaw that she used to tease him about was gone, replaced by a rugged determination. Then she searched for her. Sophia Laurent Venture Capital. The results were intimidating. Forbes 30 Under 30 alumni, a keynote speech at Davos, a candid photo of Sophia at a gallery opening in Paris, wearing a white suit, looking effortlessly chic without a single piece of jewelry. Elena scrolled down to a photo taken earlier that evening, already uploaded to a social society page. It captured the moment they walked into the Pierre. Julian was whispering something to Sophia, and Sophia was laughing. A genuine, head-thrown back laugh. Julian's hand was protective on her waist, his eyes fixed on her face with an expression of absolute adoration. Elena zoomed in on Julian's eyes. He used to look at her like that, when they were eating takeout on the floor of their first apartment, when he sketched her while she slept. That look was safety. That look was home. And she had traded it for a man who was currently drinking himself into a stupor in the next room. A man who saw her as an accessory that was depreciating in value. A notification popped up at the top of her screen. A text from the bank. Payment overdue, American Express Platinum. Elena swiped it away. She saved the photo of Julian and Sophia to her camera roll. She stared at it until the blue light of the screen blurred into a watery haze. The silence of the penthouse pressing in on her ears like the depth of the ocean. The conference room at Thorne and Associates was a study in intimidation through minimalism. Located on the 45th floor of a glass monolith in Hudson Yards, it offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River that cost more per square foot than the house Julian had grown up in. The morning light was unforgiving. It washed over the white marble table where Julian sat, flanked by his senior partners. Sophia stood at the head of the room, her silhouette framed against the skyline. She wasn't wearing the silver gown from the night before. She was in a charcoal power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, efficient bun. "The Hudson Spire isn't just a building," Sophia said, tapping the smart screen on the wall. "It is a micro-city. The Zoning Commission wants sustainability, they want mixed-use public space, and they want a landmark. We have given them a vertical forest." On the screen, Julian's design rotated in 3D, a twisting tower of glass and greenery that defied gravity. It was breathless. It was genius. "Who are we up against?" Julian asked, spinning his pen between his fingers. He already knew the answer, but the ritual of the boardroom required the question. Sophia swiped the screen. The image of the tower vanished, replaced by a list of development firms and their proposed architects. "Most dropped out when they saw the capital requirements," Sophia noted, her voice cool and clinical. "We are left with two serious contenders. The first is Davis and Lee. They are safe, boring, and under budget. The commission will hate them. And the second? Sterling Capital," Sophia said. The room went quiet. The junior associates glanced at each other, aware of the gossip but too terrified to show it. Julian didn't blink. He stared at the name on the screen. "Show me their proposal," Julian commanded. Sophia tapped the screen again. A rendering appeared next to Julian's. It was a blocky mirrored structure. It looked dated, a relic of the early 2000s, heavy, imposing, and devoid of soul. It was exactly the kind of building Marcus would commission. Loud, expensive looking, and ultimately hollow. It's derivative, one of the partners muttered. It's cheap, Sophia corrected. She pulled up a spreadsheet overlaid with red text. I ran a deep dive on Sterling's liquidity this morning. Marcus isn't just bidding on this project, gentlemen. He is betting the farm. He has leveraged his Hamptons estate, his portfolio, and even the gallery his wife runs to secure the initial bond. Julian stopped spinning his pen. He leveraged the gallery? He leveraged everything, Sophia confirmed, looking directly at Julian. If he doesn't win this bid, he defaults on the bridge loans within the quarter. Sterling Capital will be insolvent. Julian looked out the window. Below him, the city moved in its chaotic rhythm, indifferent to the fates of the men who built it. He thought of Elena. He thought of the emerald necklace that was a loner. He thought of her terrified eyes in the ballroom. If he won, which, looking at the designs, was inevitable, he wouldn't just be beating a competitor. He would be evicting his ex-wife from her life. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't joy, it wasn't guilt. It was the heavy, cold weight of absolute power. He's desperate, Julian said softly. You can see it in the design. He cut corners on the materials to lower the bid price. He's hoping the commission cares more about the bottom line than the skyline. They might, Sophia said, unless we point out the flaw. She highlighted a section of Marcus's proposal, the structural, load-bearing estimates for the foundation. He's using a concrete mixture that is barely code compliant for a structure of this height, Sophia explained. It saves him $2 million, but it risks long-term settlement issues. If we highlight this in our rebuttal presentation, he is finished. Not just for this project, but his reputation as a developer is gone. She paused, the room waiting for the order. Do we use it, Julian? It was a choice. He could win on aesthetics alone, leaving Marcus a slim chance of dignity, or he could expose the incompetence and burn Marcus to the ground. Julian looked at the rendering of Marcus's tower, a monument to greed and haste. He remembered the suitcase rolling over the floorboards. He remembered Elena saying, "You're not a winner. You never will be." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. The sound of the fabric was the only noise in the room. This is business, Julian said, his voice void of emotion. We have a responsibility to the city not to let them build something dangerous, highlight the flaw, tear the proposal apart. Sophia nodded, a small, proud smile touching her lips. Understood. And Sophia, Julian added, pausing at the glass door. Yes? Send a copy of our findings to the commission by courier this afternoon, he said. I want Marcus to know it was us. He walked out of the conference room, leaving the destruction of Elena's world in the capable hands of his wife. He had a lunch, reservation at Le Bernardin, and for the first time in 5 years, he was actually hungry. The Chelsea district was a canyon of brick and industrial steel, softened by the gray afternoon light. Julian stood inside a small, minimalist coffee shop on 22nd Street, waiting for a double espresso. He was early for a site visit at a gallery down the block, a potential renovation project that was beneath his pay grade but belonged to a friend of Sophia's. The shop was quiet, the hiss of the espresso machine the only intrusion on the low hum of indie folk music. Julian checked his watch. The Patek Philippe was a gift from Sophia on their first anniversary, inscribed with "Time is the only currency." The bell above the door chimed. A gust of cold wind followed, carrying the scent of rain and expensive floral perfume. Julian didn't turn around immediately, but the stiffening of the barista's posture told him someone of note, or perhaps just someone high maintenance, had entered. A matcha latte with oat milk. Extra hot. No foam, a voice ordered. Julian froze. He knew that order. He knew the cadence of the voice, the slight upward inflection on foam that made a request sound like a demand. He turned slowly. Elena was standing at the counter, shaking a wet umbrella. She wore a camel trench coat belted tightly at the waist and oversized sunglasses that she pushed up into her hair as she turned. She saw him. Her mouth parted slightly. For a second, the mask slipped. Panic, followed by a rush of adrenaline. She looked around, checking for Sophia, checking for Marcus. When she realized they were alone, her shoulders dropped an inch. Julian, she breathed. It wasn't a question this time. It was an exhalation. Elena, he acknowledged, taking his espresso from the counter. He made to move past her toward the door, but she stepped into his path. It was a bold move, one born of desperation. Can we sit for a minute? She asked. Her eyes were searching his face, looking for a foothold. Please, it's just coffee. Julian considered it. He held the power here. He could walk out, leaving her talking to the air. But there was a curiosity in him, a morbid desire to see what she had to say when there was no audience to perform for. 5 minutes, he said. They sat at a small birch table near the window. The street outside, it was busy with tourists walking the High Line, oblivious to the ghosts sitting behind the glass. Elena wrapped her hands around her cup, seeking warmth. You look good, Julian. Really good. Success suits you. It usually does, he replied, taking a sip of his black coffee. What do you want, Elena? She flinched at the directness, but recovered quickly with a sad, practiced smile. I don't want anything. Seeing you last night and seeing you now, it makes me think. About? About us, she said softly. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to an intimate whisper. I know you hate me. I know I hurt you. But sometimes I wonder, if I hadn't done what I did, would you be here? Julian set his cup down. The ceramic made a sharp click against the wood. Excuse me? Elena continued, gaining momentum, her eyes wide and earnest. You were so comfortable back then, Julian. You were content with small projects. You were safe, leaving you. It broke you, yes, but it also woke you up. It forced you to go to London. It made you hungry. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing the cuff of his jacket. Maybe I had to be the villain in your story so you could become the hero. Maybe I did it for you. It was a breathtaking display of revisionist history. She was trying to turn her betrayal into a sacrifice, her selfishness into a martyrdom. She wanted absolution. She wanted him to thank her for destroying him. Julian looked at her hand on his sleeve. He didn't pull away. He just looked at it with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. Is that what you tell yourself? He asked quietly. When you lie awake at night next to Marcus, that you're a martyr? Elena pulled her hand back as if burned. I'm trying to find meaning in it, Julian. There is no meaning, Julian said. His voice was not angry, it was terrifyingly calm. You didn't leave to make me better. You left because you calculated that Marcus was a better bet. You bet on the wrong horse, Elena. That's not a sacrifice, that's just bad math. Elena's face crumbled. The narrative she had constructed to survive her own guilt was dissolving in front of her. I loved you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I did love you. I know, Julian said. He stood up, buttoning his coat. That's the worst part. You loved me, and it wasn't enough. You wanted security more than you wanted me. Now you have neither. He looked down at her. She looked small, trapped in her trench coat, trapped in her choices. I don't hate you, Elena, he delivered the final blow. I'm indifferent to you, and frankly, I have a skyline to build. He walked out into the gray afternoon. He didn't look back to see if she was crying. He checked his phone, a message from Sophia. The courier delivered the package to the commission. It's done. Julian took a deep breath of the cold air. The rain had stopped. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy, and woven from cotton stock so thick it felt more like a shingle than paper. It sat on the black marble kitchen island of the Tribeca penthouse, an intruder in the sanctuary of calm Julian and Sophia had built. Julian loosened his tie, the fabric rasping against his collar. He poured 2 glasses of Bordeaux, sliding one across the cool stone towards Sophia. She was leaning against the counter, reading the invitation with a faint, unreadable smile playing on her lips. Sag Harbor, Sophia read aloud, her voice smooth. An intimate weekend gathering to celebrate the end of summer and future endeavors. She looked up, her eyes glinting with amusement. He has no idea, does he? No, Julian said, taking a sip of the wine. It was rich, oaky, and grounded him. The commission won't release the findings on his foundation cracks until Monday. As far as Marcus knows, he is still in the running. He thinks we are just competitors, not executioners. Why invite us? Sophia asked, tapping the card against her manicured nail. He hates you. He made that clear at the Pierre. He needs optics, Julian replied, walking to the window. The lights of lower Manhattan sprawled out before him, a grid of ambition and electricity. If he is seen hosting the competition, it makes him look confident, magnanimous. It signals to the banks that he isn't afraid of Thorne and Associates. It's a bluff. A bluff funded by credit, Sophia added dryly. She set the card down. So what do we tell him? Julian hesitated. The meeting with Elena in the coffee shop was still fresh in his mind, her desperate revisionism, her smallness. He had told her he was indifferent, and he believed it. But walking into their home, sleeping under their roof, while knowing he had effectively lit the fuse that would blow their lives apart, it felt distinctively cold. Do we really want to spend a weekend watching them pretend to be happy? Julian asked. It feels sadistic. It's not sadism, Julian. It's closure, Sophia corrected him gently. She walked over, standing behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Her chin rested on his shoulder. You ran away 5 years ago. You left the city. You left the narrative in their hands. If you don't go back and see the reality of what they have become, the cracks in the plaster, the bad plumbing of their marriage, you will always wonder if you were the one who lost. She turned him around to face her. Her gaze was intense, unwavering. We go. We drink their wine. We politely decline their business propositions, and then we drive away. You need to see that the house you are mourning is actually a ruin. Julian looked at the invitation again. The calligraphy was elegant, likely Elena's choice. Mr. and Mrs. Julian Thorne. It was a summons to the past, but this time he wasn't walking in as the discarded husband. He was walking in as the storm. He's going to try to cut a deal, Julian predicted. He'll try to get me to joint venture on the Spire so he can save face. Let him try, Sophia whispered, kissing him lightly on the jaw. It will be a masterclass in negotiation. Besides, I've never seen the Hamptons in the fall. I hear the light is unforgiving. Julian picked up the heavy cardstock. He felt the texture of it, the expense. He thought of Elena's unpaid credit card bill notification he had glimpsed on her phone screen in the ballroom, a detail he hadn't mentioned to Sophia. All right, Julian said, tossing the invitation back onto the marble. RSVP, yes. I already did, Sophia smiled, picking up her wine glass. Pack something linen, darling. It's going to be a long weekend. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the pane glass of the penthouse, whispering of the storm that was about to descend on Sag Harbor. The Sterling estate in Sag Harbor was an architectural assertion of dominance. Cedar shingles weathering to a tasteful gray, manicured hedges that looked like they were cut with lasers, and a view of the bay that cost millions. Yet, as the gravel crunched beneath the tires of the rental Range Rover, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that the house looked less like a home and more like a stage set awaiting actors. They were greeted not by staff, but by Marcus himself holding a tumbler of scotch at 2 in the afternoon. Welcome to the humble abode, Marcus shouted over the wind, his face flushed. Park anywhere. The gardener didn't come today. Hard to get good help this late in the season. Sophia exchanged a brief glance with Julian, a micro-expression that communicated everything. Money trouble. Inside, the house was cavernous. The furniture was white linen, pristine and terrifying. Elena descended the main staircase as they entered. She wore a flowing sundress that seemed too light for the autumn chill, her arms wrapped around herself. You made it, she said, her smile brittle. I put you in the East Wing. It has the best light in the morning. Thank you, Elena, Sophia said, handing her a bottle of vintage wine. A little something for dinner. Oh, lovely, Elena said, taking the bottle. I'll have to find the opener. We let the house manager go last month. Downsizing. Simpler life, you know? The lie was thin. Julian looked at the dust gathering on the molding of the high ceiling. It wasn't simplicity, it was triage. Dinner was served on the patio, under the heat lamps that hissed against the dropping temperature. Marcus dominated the conversation, monologuing about the bond markets and his vision for the Hudson Spire, oblivious to the fact that his guests had already killed his bid. We're doing a seafood tower. Marcus announced grandly as he brought out a massive silver platter piled high with oysters, clams, and lobster. Elena adores oysters. Can't get enough of them. Right, darling? He plopped a large, glistening oyster onto Elena's plate. Julian froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. 5 years ago, on their honeymoon in Maine, Elena had tried an oyster to please him. She had barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. It wasn't just a dislike, it was a visceral, textural phobia she had held since childhood. Elena looked down at the gray, slimy mollusk on her plate. Her throat bobbed. Marcus, she started, her voice faint. Eat up, sweetheart. They're Kumamotos. Sweet as candy, Marcus insisted, already slinging one back. He looked at Julian. You have to spoil them, Thorne. That's the secret. Give them what they want before they ask. Julian watched Elena. She picked up her fork, her hand trembling. She was going to eat it. She was going to force down something that made her sick, rather than correct her husband in front of his rival. It was a display of submission that was painful to witness. Actually, Julian said, his voice cutting through the salt air, I think Elena prefers the lobster claws. If memory serves, the texture of oysters doesn't agree with her. The table went silent. The wind whistled through the dune grass. Marcus stopped chewing. He looked from Julian to Elena. Is that right? Elena closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, a moment of shame and relief. Yes, she whispered. I'll have the lobster. Huh, Marcus grunted, stabbing the oyster on her plate and transferring it to his own. Could have sworn you loved them, must be thinking of someone else. The casual cruelty of the comment, the implication of other women, or simply the total lack of interest in his wife's basic preferences, hung heavy in the air. Sophia, who had been dissecting a clam with surgical precision, looked up. Her gaze on Marcus was predatory. It's remarkable what we remember about people, isn't it? And what we choose to forget. Memory's a funny thing, Marcus laughed, pouring himself more wine, spilling a few drops on the white tablecloth. So, Julian, about this Spire project, I was thinking if we win, there might be room for a consultant, someone with your artistic flair. He was offering Julian crumbs from a table that didn't exist. We can discuss business later, Marcus, Julian said, pushing his plate away. He had lost his appetite. He looked at Elena. She was picking at the lobster shell, her head bowed, looking like a child who had been scolded. This wasn't the woman who had walked out on him with her chin held high. This was a woman who had been slowly eroded, day by day, by a man who didn't bother to learn her favorite color, let alone her fears. I'm going to get a shawl, Elena said suddenly, standing up. It's getting cold. Grab another bottle of white while you're in there, Marcus shouted after her. Julian watched her retreat into the shadows of the house. He felt a hand on his knee under the table. Sophia, she wasn't squeezing it in victory this time. She was squeezing it in solidarity. She's trapped, the gesture said, and for the first time, Julian realized that leaving Elena behind hadn't been a punishment. It had been an escape. The house settled into the night with the groans typical of timber facing a storm. The wind off the bay battered the shingles, whistling through the gaps in the window frames. Julian couldn't sleep. The silence in the guest suite was heavy, broken only by the steady, rhythmic breathing of Sophia beside him. She slept the sleep of the righteous, or at least, the sleep of the victorious. Julian slipped out of bed, pulling on a cashmere cardigan over his t-shirt. He needed water, or perhaps just space to think. The image of Elena forcing down that oyster had stuck in his throat like a splinter. He navigated the long, darkened hallway, the floorboards creaking under his bare feet. He passed the master bedroom. The door was ajar, and the sound of heavy, jagged snoring drifted out. Marcus, deeply anesthetized by his own liquor cabinet. Julian headed downstairs, intending to go to the kitchen, but a flicker of light from the library stopped him. The door was cracked open, revealing the glow of a single ember's dying fire. He pushed the door open. Elena was there. She wasn't wearing the sundress anymore. She was wrapped in a silk robe that looked expensive, but worn at the hem. She stood by the fireplace, staring into the dying coals, a glass of amber liquid in her hand. She looked like a heroine from a Gothic novel, waiting for a tragedy to happen. I knew you'd come down, she said, not turning around. Her voice was thick, slightly slurred. I was looking for the kitchen, Elena, Julian said, keeping his hand on the doorknob, ready to leave. Go to bed. You remembered, she turned then. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows across her face. Her eyes were bright, too bright. At dinner, you remembered about the oysters. Marcus has been my husband for 5 years, and he doesn't know. You haven't seen me in 5 years, and you knew. She took a step toward him. The scent of her hit him, her familiar perfume, layered over the sharp tang of whiskey. It's not a compliment, Elena, Julian said, his voice low and guarded. It's just a fact. I have a good memory. Don't do that, she whispered, closing the distance. She was standing right in front of him now. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin. Don't pretend you don't feel it. I saw you looking at me tonight. I saw you looking at this wreckage of a house. I was looking at a bad investment, Julian said coldly. Nothing more. Liar, she hissed, but there was no venom in it, only desperation. She reached out, her hands trembling as they found the lapels of his cardigan. You're still the same man, Julian. You're just angry. You have every right to be angry. I made a mistake. God, I made such a mistake. She pressed herself against him. It was a clumsy, frantic movement. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling sharply. Take me away, she sobbed into his shirt. Take me back to the city. I can't stay here. The debts, the drinking. He's drowning, Julian, and he's dragging me down with him. You won. Okay, you won. You're the winner. Just save me. It was the plea he had fantasized about hearing 3 years ago. In his darkest moments in London, he had imagined her coming back, begging, admitting he was the better man. He had thought it would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like holding a wet bird that had flown into a window. It was just sad. Her hands moved up to his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, trying to pull his face down to hers. She was trying to kiss him, trying to use her body as currency because she had nothing else left to trade. Elena. Stop, Julian said. No, she pleaded, rising on her tiptoes, her breath hot on his jaw. I know you want this. I know you still want me. Sophia, she's cold. She's a calculator. She doesn't know you like I do. She didn't struggle with you. She didn't leave me, Julian said. He caught her wrists. He didn't squeeze, didn't hurt her, but the wall he put up was impenetrable. He pulled her hands away from his body and stepped back, creating a chasm of 2 feet that might as well have been 2 miles. Elena stumbled slightly, her balance compromised by the alcohol and the rejection. She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. She had played her final card, their shared history, her physical allure, and it had bounced off him like rain on stone. Julian, she whispered, the name sounding small in the high-ceilinged room. You're drunk, Elena, Julian said, adjusting his cardigan, smoothing the fabric where she had clutched it. And you are idealizing the past because your present is unbearable. Go to bed, before you say something that makes tomorrow morning impossible. He turned to leave. He's going to lose the bid, isn't he? She asked suddenly. Her voice had changed. The seduction was gone, replaced by a cold, terrified clarity. Julian stopped in the doorway. He didn't turn back. Good night, Elena. He walked out, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the storm rattling the windows, knowing that the silence he left behind was louder than any scream. The morning light in the Hamptons was known for its clarity. Painters loved it. Aging socialites feared it. It was a cold, harsh illumination that stripped away shadows and left nowhere to hide. Julian stood on the back terrace, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand, watching the fog roll off the bay. The storm had passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean and smelling of salt and damp earth. He felt remarkably light. The encounter in the library had not haunted his sleep. In fact, he had slept better than he had in years. The sound of the sliding glass door opening behind him was soft, hesitant. He didn't need to turn to know it was Elena. The heavy, shuffling footsteps were not those of Sophia, who moved with the silent grace of a cat. I didn't think you'd be up. Elena's voice was raspy, stripped of its usual polish. Julian turned. Elena looked wrecked. She was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide the puffiness of her eyes, and she had wrapped herself in a thick wool cardigan that swallowed her frame. She looked like a survivor of a shipwreck, washed ashore on her own patio. "I'm an early riser now," Julian said, taking a sip of his coffee. Habit from the construction sites. Elena walked to the railing, keeping a safe distance from him. She gripped the wood, her knuckles white. "About last night, I was drunk. I was upset. The pressure with Marcus. The debt. I didn't mean what I said." "Which part?" Julian asked calmly. "The part about wanting me back, or the part about Marcus dragging you down?" Elena flinched. She lowered her head. "All of it. It was inappropriate. I don't want you to think." She trailed off, struggling to find a narrative that preserved her dignity. "I don't want you to think I'm unhappy. We have problems, yes, but I love him." It was such a fragile lie that Julian almost felt the urge to catch it before it shattered on the floor. "Elena," Julian said. He placed his mug on the railing. "Stop. I just want us to be okay," she pressed, looking up at him, her eyes pleading behind the dark lenses. "I want to know that you don't hate me, that you've forgiven me, because if you hate me, it means I still matter to you. It means there's still something." Julian looked at her. He really looked at her. He remembered the curve of her neck, the way she used to laugh, the way she had looked standing in their hallway with those suitcases. For 5 years, those memories had been razor blades in his mind. But this morning, in this merciless light, she was just a woman in a sweater. A woman who had made a series of calculations based on fear and greed, and who was now paying the interest on those debts. "I don't hate you, Elena," Julian said softly. "You don't?" Hope flickered in her voice, a dangerous thing. "No," Julian continued, his voice steady, devoid of malice, but also devoid of warmth. "Hate requires energy. It requires investment. To hate you, I would have to wake up in the morning and think about you. I would have to wonder what you're doing, who you're with, if you're happy." He paused, letting the wind carry the silence between them. "But I don't. When I wake up, I think about my wife. I think about my work. I think about the coffee. You aren't a villain in my story anymore, Elena. You aren't even a character. You're just something that happened to me a long time ago, like a broken bone that healed." Elena took a step back as if he had struck her. The physical blow would have been kinder. Anger she could have fought. Hatred she could have seduced. But this erasure, it was absolute. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I do," Julian said. "I came here this weekend because Sophia thought I needed to see it, to see this." He gestured vaguely at the house, at her, at the empty air where a happy marriage should be. And she was right. I needed to see that the life I thought I lost never really existed. He picked up his coffee. "I'm not angry, Elena. I'm free." The sliding door opened again, louder this time. Sophia stepped out, dressed in crisp white linen, looking vibrant and sharp against the gray morning. "Good morning," Sophia said, her voice bright. She walked over to Julian, sliding her arm through his, claiming him without effort. She glanced at Elena, then at Julian. She read the room instantly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Julian said, looking at his wife. "We were just saying goodbye." Elena stood frozen by the railing, shivering in the cold wind. She watched them, the way they stood together, a unified front of success and stability. She realized then that she hadn't just lost the man, she had lost the memory of him. He had taken it back, scrubbed it clean, and given it to someone else. "Breakfast is ready inside," Sophia said to Elena, her tone polite but distant. "Marcus is asking for a Bloody Mary." Elena didn't move. She watched them walk back into the house, leaving her alone with the view of the bay, gray, flat, and endlessly empty. The dining room was bathed in the same merciless light that had flooded the terrace, but here, filtered through the oversized windows, it felt suffocating. The breakfast spread was lavish. Smoked salmon, pastries, crystal carafes of juice, but it looked like a feast laid out for ghosts. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his complexion a mottled red. The Bloody Mary in his hand was his third of the morning. Elena sat to his right, wearing her sunglasses indoors, pushing a piece of melon around her plate with the lethargy of a prisoner. Julian and Sophia sat opposite them, eating with quiet, synchronized efficiency. I'm telling you, Marcus said, his voice booming too loud for the room. The commission is just dragging their feet. They want a bribe. That's how this city works. You know that, Thorne. You have to grease the wheels. Actually, Julian said, slicing a piece of toast, I find that if the engineering is sound, the wheels turn themselves. Marcus sneered, opening his mouth to retort, but the vibration of his phone against the mahogany table cut him off. It was a harsh, insistent buzz. Marcus glanced at the screen. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, and then to a terrifying stillness. He set his drink down. The glass missed the coaster, tilting precariously before settling. He picked up the phone. He read the email. He read it again. The silence that stretched across the table was heavy enough to collapse a lung. Sophia took a sip of her tea, her eyes fixed on Marcus over the rim of her cup. What is it? Elena asked, her voice thin. Marcus? Marcus didn't answer her. He stood up slowly. He looked at Julian. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, only the raw, naked shock of a man watching his life burn down. Disqualified, Marcus whispered. The word sounded like it was choking him. What? Elena asked. Disqualified, Marcus roared, hurling the phone across the room. It smashed against the fireplace, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. They disqualified the bid, citing gross negligence in foundation planning and substandard material sourcing. They're pulling the bond, Elena. They're pulling the goddamn bond. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Who told them? Who the hell dug into the specs? He glared at Julian, his paranoia flaring. Did you do this, Thorne? Did you rat me out? Julian wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He didn't. Stand up. He didn't raise his voice. I didn't write your specs, Marcus, and I didn't mix your concrete. If your building was going to fall down, that's not sabotage. That's physics. Marcus's face twisted. He couldn't attack Julian. Julian was the winner, the superior, the man with the clean hands. So, like water seeking the path of least resistance, his rage turned toward the person who couldn't fight back. He spun on Elena. Stop crying, he shouted. Though Elena hadn't made a sound, she was just trembling, her hands covering her mouth. You think this is bad? Do you have any idea what this means? The loans for the spire were secured against this house, against your gallery. Elena lowered her hands. The gallery? You said the gallery was safe. I said a lot of things, Marcus spat. I needed liquidity, and now it's gone. All of it. The creditors will be here by Monday. We're done, do you understand? There is no Hampton's house. There is no penthouse. There is a nothing. He laughed, a manic broken sound. So much for the upgrade, huh? You left him, he pointed a shaking finger at Julian, because he was poor. And now look at him and look at you. You're back to zero, darling. Less than zero, you're a liability. It was the brutal, unvarnished truth. The transaction that was their marriage had failed. Elena sat frozen, the sunglasses slipped down her nose, revealing eyes that were wide with horror. She looked at Julian, a silent plea for salvation, for intervention, for anything. But Julian just watched. He watched the way one watches a demolition from a safe distance. He saw the karma, the cause and effect, the inevitable collapse of a structure built on lies. He felt no satisfaction, only a profound sense of completion. Sophia stood up. The movement was graceful, commanding attention. I think, Sophia said, her voice calm and piercing, that we have overstayed our welcome. She walked around the table to Julian. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Marcus, Julian said, nodding to the ruined man. Good luck with the creditors. He turned to Elena. She was staring at the tablecloth, tears finally sliding out from under the dark lenses. She didn't look up. She couldn't. Goodbye, Elena, Julian said. He offered his arm to Sophia. They walked out of the dining room, leaving the Sterlings amidst the wreckage of their breakfast and their lives. The sound of Marcus pouring another drink followed them down the hall, the distinctive glug, glug, glug of a man trying to drown a fire that was already consuming him.